Some crimes are so heartbreaking or shocking that they change laws, change society, or even earn the label crime of the century. But the stories that made headlines in decades past aren't necessarily remembered today. I'm Amber Hunt, a journalist and author, and in each episode of this show, I'll examine a case that's maybe lesser known today, but was huge when it happened. This is Crimes of the Centuries. Janet Fay's profile said she was 41 years old, 5'4", and weighed 135 pounds. It also said she was a good Catholic girl with money in the bank, $7,000 to be exact, which was a good bit in 1948. And it said Janet was looking for romance. She found Charles Martin instead, a man, judging from his letters, who was equally devout and equally interested in pursuing a romantic relationship. A real one, you know, the forever kind. The kind that Janet had before she was widowed, before her life had grown lonely. And it was so hard to meet nice men. The pair had corresponded a little. He'd found her name when he'd filled out a few of the advertisements for what were called Lonely Hearts correspondence clubs, usually found in women's magazines. These clubs offered to help anyone find a congenial mate. All you had to do was send pictures and a description and trust that this dependable, confidential service could find you a match for, a nominal fee. And just like that, via return mail, a list of potential marks was handed to grifter Charles Martin. A list that included age, status, widowed or divorced, and financial circumstances. It was some setup. Charles trusted his ability to charm the ladies into bed and out of their bank accounts. He'd get rich, they'd get mad, he'd disappear. They'd have learned a costly lesson, but a valuable one. Before he could start, he had work to do. He had to winnow those lists down, nixing the ones that seemed the least promising, which left him with just over 200 worthy of his time and epistolary effort. Janet Fay made the cut. Of course, his name wasn't really Charles Martin, it was Ray Fernandez. And Ray was pretty good looking, but, not exactly unattached. He had a wife and children in Spain before serving in the Spanish Civil War, then for the British as a courier for spies during World War II. In fairness, Janet had lied too. She wasn't 41, she was 66. But as you'll learn, her fib was nothing compared to her beaus. As Ray, had worked his dangerous spy job, his higher-ups found him to be extremely competent and loyal. Just after the war, times were hard and money was scarce in Europe, so Ray, who had been born in Hawaii to Spanish parents, figured he'd go to New York to work so he could send money back to support his family. He got himself on an oil tanker that sailed from Spain to Panama and on to New York. During that voyage, a fierce storm tossed the boat so severely that it began to take on water. Ray jumped in to help pump the water out on the lower level when a large metal hatch slammed down on his head, causing a severe injury that left him with a large scar and a lifetime of excruciating headaches. True crime author J.T. Hunter spoke to NBC Radio's House of Mystery to talk about the case.
Family members and people who knew him said that he changed quite a bit after that accident happened. They said he became much more aggressive, had much more of a quick temper than before. And he himself, reported that he had headaches, severe headaches, off and on throughout his life after that.
People who knew him before his head injury said he also ceased to have a moral compass, or maybe he just didn't care anymore if something was evil or wrong. And he became what we might know today as a sex addict. The guy just couldn't be satisfied. Ray figured he was owed a better life. One with sex and money. Soon enough, whatever plans he had got sidetracked when he stole $53 worth of goods off a boat and spent 6 months in 1946 in a federal penitentiary in Tallahassee. While there, a Haitian prisoner taught him about voodoo, and that was pretty much all Ray needed to convince himself that he could use black magic for his own purposes. In case you forgot, that was to get sex and money. J.T. Hunter again.
So Ray got really interested in this voodoo, started reading up on it, and became convinced that he could hypnotize people and have this kind of supernatural influence on others, including women.
That was when he found the Lonely Hearts Clubs and began writing women to express his desire to get to know them better.
These weren't typically just kind of one-night stand hookup sort of things. This was more typically the folks involved, at least the ones that were legit, they were looking for more serious relationships. And it seems like quite a lot of them tended to be older women. Oftentimes they were, widows. Their husbands had maybe died during the war or after. They're looking for, potentially a new husband.
There was one woman who intrigued him. Her name was Jane Thompson. She lived in New York, not too far from Ray, who was now 34 and living with his sister Lena. And there was another one he soon enough had on the line as well. Her name was Martha Beck, a thrice-divorced nurse from Pensacola, a mother of 2 young children, who also had a few dollars he figured he could talk her out of. In September of 1947, both women were getting the full Ray Fernandez rush, Jane in person and Martha by letter. In fact, Ray had asked Martha to marry him just as soon as he returned from Spain. Martha said yes. They, by the way, had never met in person. Now, Martha didn't know it, but Ray was going to Spain with the other woman, Jane Thompson. They were going to be there in late fall. It was so exciting for Jane, who lived with her mother, to be wooed out of the country by this debonair guy who spoke Spanish fluently and seemed to want to spend the rest of his life with her. On November 7th, she was found dead in the couple's Spanish hotel room in the same city where Ray's wife, Encarnacion, and his children just so happened to live. While Jane lay cold between the sheets, Ray spent the night with his wife, patted his children on the head, and left the country. 6 weeks later, Martha Beck met the love of her life, and Janet Faye was in line to meet hers. Crimes This Centuries is sponsored by Miracle Made. I'm so excited Miracle Made is back. It's summer, and my nighttime bedroom temperature has a huge impact on my overall sleep quality. I can wake up sweating like some disgusting horror movie creature when not using my Miracle Made bed sheets. Miracle Made sheets are inspired by NASA and use silver-infused fabrics that are temperature regulating so you can sleep at night at the perfect temperature all night long. That silver isn't just to sound fancy either. It prevents 99.9% of bacterial growth, allowing them to stay cleaner 3 times longer than other sheets. And by the way, by keeping cleaner longer, you're not sleeping on bacteria, which can clog your pores, causing breakouts and acne. Go to trymiracle.com/COTC to try Miracle Made sheets today. And whether you're buying them for yourself or as a gift for a loved one, if you order today, you can save over 40%. And if you use our promo code COTC at checkout, you'll get 3 free towels and save an extra 20%. Miracle is so confident in their product, it's back with a 30-day money-back guarantee, so if you aren't 100% satisfied, you'll get a full refund. Upgrade your sleep with Miracle Made. Go to trymiracle.com/COTC and use the code COTC to claim your free 3-piece towel set and save over 40% off. Again, that's trymiracle.com/COTC to treat yourself. Thank you, Miracle Made, for sponsoring this episode. In the late 1940s, America had almost 7 million widows. They were not all elderly, the war having taken way too many young men away from their lives here. In the late 40s, unregulated clubs for the lonely in search of a relationship popped up to help them out. Most of the club members, 90%, were women.
It was, kind of comparable to like an online dating service today. Except, of course, back then, there's no internet, there's no online anything. People would then write into the clubs to join them, and then once they joined, they would receive a list of all the members of the club, and then they would have information about them, and then they could, at that point, reach out to the members and contact them and, see if there's mutual interest in pursuing some sort of romantic relationship or the like.
Between 1949 and 1952, according to one Sunday magazine story, 73 major crimes were associated with those hookups. The crimes included swindling, blackmail, and murder. Ray, aka Charles Martin, would marry 7 women without ever getting a single divorce. When he was done, he would say he murdered 19. Or was it 20? But he was known to be a liar, just as he was known to be a ladies' man and a heartbreaker. His spree was aided and abetted by a seemingly unlikely partner, Martha Beck. The pair would become collectively known as the Lonely Hearts Killers. Although by the time they were done, headline writers across the country would search for new monikers. A few choice ones: Cement Slayers and Love Cobras. And believe me, they made the papers, so much so that by the time their trial came around, thousands upon thousands of column inches had been eaten up by their exploits, so much so that moving their New York trial anywhere in New York in hopes of getting an impartial jury seemed impossible. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to when Raymond met Martha. It was mid-December when they first laid eyes on one another at the Pensacola train station. After just 2 days together, Ray wondered if they should go ahead and get married. Martha was besotted with Ray, body and soul. He had movie star looks and a deep baronial voice that was like silk, even when he asked for coffee. He was not at all like those other men who had responded to her club membership application requesting a possible relationship. When she had exchanged pictures with them, they had been insulting. So what if she didn't have movie star looks herself? Not everyone did. Not everyone could be like Ray. Ray knew what made women swoon, so he said all of the right things to Martha. Plus, he'd been kind to her 2 children, even played with them a little. I mean, had you ever seen such a thing? What a guy. Martha was in. They were ready to tie the knot, but not before Ray headed back to New York to finish up some business. While he was away, they kept up their torrid letter-writing campaign until the day after Christmas, when Martha read the most recent letter. Ray wrote that he felt he had made a mistake and the wedding was off. Life was not worth living anymore, Martha decided as she closed up her house tight and, with the children in bed, turned on the gas and waited to die. But a girlfriend smelled gas outside the apartment, and the suicide note that Martha had left for Ray to find was mailed directly to him in New York. Martha was not what most people would consider a beauty, and she was not a girl who played the field. She was a tad dumpy. Newspaper reporters would later refer to her as moon-faced and fat, and a tad ordinary, and she had never felt as alive as she had those few days when Ray had dropped into her life. Now, a concerned Ray asked if she wanted to visit him in New York. In the apartment he had once shared with the now dead Jane Thompson and her mother, Pearl Wilson, who was still there. Ray quickly dispatched Pearl to her son's home so that he could enjoy Martha's attentions undisturbed. When the 2-week vacation was over, Ray told her that he had a wife and 4 children in Spain. See, he seemed to say, just can't do it. On January 19th, Martha called to say she and the kids were waiting for him at Penn Station. Not pleased at this development, Ray nevertheless picked them up. Later, he informed Martha that she could stay, but the kids had to go. So Martha took them to a Salvation Army shelter and left them there, never to see them again. She would justify this act by saying that her love for Ray made her do it, because he was just that important, and she would follow him anywhere. And she meant it. Even when he explained his line of work, with the other women, she could stay, he said, if she didn't get in the way of him making money. Their plan then was to stay together, with Martha posing as his sister. That way she could always be in tow. When he married a woman named Esther Henney in Reading, Pennsylvania, the sexual relationship with Martha continued even while the new Mrs. Fernandez was bathing in the next room. Esther signed over her pension, car, and rent money to Ray and was about to do the same with her insurance when she suddenly thought better of it. She returned to her home and found pawn receipts where her jewelry had been. She was glad to get away and didn't pursue any legal recovery of her money. She would have been too embarrassed to tell police what she had done. She just wanted that part of her life to be over. But Martha and Ray were just getting started. They moved to Chicago, living for a while on the money from the sale of Jane's apartment and the proceeds from Esther's car. Then came 40-year-old Myrtle Young from small-town Arkansas. The story is pretty much the same here, except that after marrying Ray, Myrtle thought Sister Martha should live on her own somewhere. Ray and Martha apparently disagreed, having Martha drug Myrtle with a wad of barbiturates before putting the unconscious woman on a bus back to Arkansas. Martha and Ray moved around the South looking for marks. Meanwhile, Myrtle was found on a Greyhound almost 2 weeks later in Springfield, Missouri, incoherent and rambling about crimes against her. Her family put her in the hospital where, pretty soon, Myrtle died of heart disease, or maybe from a brain hemorrhage from a blow to the head. The authorities weren't quite sure. Soon, Ray got a letter from a very pretty woman named Irene de la Pointe. She was Ray's type, and he suggested maybe Martha should go back to Florida to wait for him. Martha was not having it. She would stay put. As the correspondence continued, Martha deduced that Ray, still going by the name Charles Martin, might actually be into Irene. Well, not on Martha's watch. So, after a few weeks and signs that another marriage was in the offing, Martha wrote a letter to Irene detailing her real relationship with Ray, his real name, and his less than good intentions. Angry, Ray put Martha on a bus to her sister in South Carolina. But for Martha, it was round trip as she popped back into Ray's life to tell him she was 7 months pregnant. Ray was not interested in being a father again and told her to get rid of the baby. He did say he loved her, which was all she needed to hear before she drank something vile and, content warning here, it's brief but awful, stuck a knitting needle into her vagina until some liquid leaked out. Weeks later, back with Ray, working as a domestic, she gave birth to a near-term stillborn daughter, whom she threw into an incinerator. Ray set out then to woo Janet Fay, an Albany woman who appeared to have quite a few liquid assets. Janet wanted to meet Charles Martin as soon as possible. Charles, meanwhile, was sending cash back to Spain and supporting Martha as they hopscotched across the country looking for dupes. They showed up in upstate New York around Christmas and told Janet that they'd been mugged and had no money. She invited them to stay with her. She then invited him to meet her friends and her stepdaughter, all of whom approved of Janet's new beau. She, too, swooned at his decency and Christian faith, his gentlemanly tone, and his respect for her dignity, so much so that, despite her best efforts to seduce him, he would not engage in sexual relations until after they were properly married. Sexual relations with her, that is. He was having plenty of sex with Martha. Janet agreed to start consolidating her 3 bank accounts. The banks each wrote her a check for the amount she had deposited with them. She also took out some money via cashier's checks and withdrew everything, jewelry, bonds, and cash, from her safety deposit boxes. Poor Janet even told Charles that she was uncomfortable with all that money in her purse, and he offered kindly to hold it for her. What a nice guy. Especially since they were all 3 going on a trip to New York City in early January 1949. They'd be staying at an apartment that Ray and Martha had rented. They made sure no one saw them enter, going up the back stairs. Ray made a few trips out to the car to retrieve luggage, making a special trip to grab a ball-peen hammer to supposedly hang some pictures with. It's reported Martha looked surprised when he added, quote, "Besides, we might need it later," end quote. Crimes of Centuries is sponsored by IQ Bar. Hey, I just had an IQ Bar for breakfast. It was almond butter chip and it was delicious. And I've only scratched the surface of what IQ Bar has to offer because they have those brain and body boosting bars as well as hydration mixes and mushroom coffees. A great place to start is with the sampler pack. It includes all 3 products. Get 7 IQ Bar flavors, 4 IQ Mix flavors, and 4 IQ Joe flavors. And today our listeners get an exclusive offer for 20% off plus free shipping. Just text Centuries to 64,000. Now, all of these products from IQ Bar are entirely free from gluten, dairy, soy, GMOs, and artificial sweeteners. IQ Mix is a zero-sugar drink mix that hydrates with electrolytes, improves mood with magnesium, and boosts clarity with lion's mane adaptogen. IQ Joe is a jitter-free instant coffee packed with 200 milligrams of natural caffeine and more of that magnesium and lion's mane. Refuel smarter with IQ Bar's Ultimate Sampler Pack. That's 7 IQ Bars, 4 IQ Mix Sticks, and 4 IQ Joe Sticks. And now our special podcast listeners get 20% off all IQ Bar products, plus they get free shipping. To get your 20% off, just text Centuries to 64,000. Get your discount, text Centuries to 64,000. That's CENTURIES to 64,000. Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details. Martha Beck made dinner as Janet and her new fiancé, also Martha's supposed brother, discussed wedding plans. When Janet went to bathe, Martha urged some quickie sex, which Ray turned down. Then he devised a fun surprise for Janet, in which he had her sign a few sheets of paper that had "surprise" written on the top, leaving a blank space in the middle for what Charles/Ray would later reveal. I gotta say right here, I feel bad for these women, and not just because of how these interactions with Ray and Martha always seem to turn out. I feel bad because they were this lonely, or this sad, or this desperate that this man, with his brooding good looks and affectionate attention, could so easily cause them to lose their senses. I know, it still happens every day, but it's a good reminder. Women, we gotta know our worth. Sorry for the digression. Anyway, Martha was pissed. She was sharing the double bed with Janet, who was chattering away, asking all kinds of questions about Ray that she felt she should know if she was going to marry him. It was very late, around 3 a.m, when Janet got a bee in her bonnet about locking the apartment door. She didn't remember anyone locking it. Maybe they should go ask Ray. Martha said they'd check in the morning. Janet said she had a lot of money in the apartment and she thought they should lock the doors. Martha was telling her to give it a rest when Janet said she was going to take all the money to the bank herself the next day and she would call her sister-in-law for some further advice. Then Martha and Janet got into a real screaming match, with Martha finally waking Ray to tell him to give Janet her money back and, while he's at it, put her on a bus back to Albany. Janet said she didn't want to go back to Albany and she just wanted to think things through. Ray told Martha to keep Janet quiet. Martha nodded. Janet, sensing some conspiracy against her, asked loudly if Martha was telling Ray what to do. It escalated from there to Janet saying once they were married, Martha would not be living with them and she wouldn't have to compete with Martha for his time. Ray asked, out loud, if Martha had told Janet anything. Martha said no. Then Ray told Martha to get that woman quiet, and he didn't care how. Next thing you know, Janet was riffling through her suitcase when Martha took the hammer that was close by and struck Janet as hard as she could in the head. Twice. Not dead yet when Ray entered the room, Janet moaned, maybe for help. Ray took a silk scarf and wound it around Janet's neck until the scarf was soaked in blood, and Janet was dead. Then Martha and Ray put Janet in the closet and came up with a plan. They would rent a house with a basement, put the body in a large trunk, dig a hole in the basement floor, drop the trunk in, cover it up with concrete, and voila, no more Janet. But first they had to cash all those checks that were made out to Janet, and this proved harder than it looked, as each bank said you had to go to the bank that issued the check to cash it, or that they had to open an account there, or they had to call the payee to get authorization. It took a whole day to round up the $6,000 they would need to live, now that they might be on the run. Then they made plans to sell Janet's house for another $6,000. Still, there was the body in the apartment closet, and it was not lavender and roses in there. Martha, posing as Janet, sent a telegram to Janet's stepdaughter, Mary, saying she was having a great time. Then Martha and Ray went house hunting and found something to rent in Queens. Ray borrowed a pickaxe from the construction company he was working for, and they had Janet under the basement floor in no time. They covered her in concrete and waited for it to dry, and when it did in 3 days' time, they told the rental agency that the house didn't work after all, so the deal was off. And they remembered to type nice letters to Janet's relatives every once in a while to stave off any suspicion. They knew they were just buying time, but they were pretty pleased with themselves that they were covering their asses. Ray went back to his real sister's house, picked up his mail, which he always had sent there, and found 28-year-old Delphine Downing, a widow from Wyoming Township, Michigan, with a 20-month-old daughter named Raynell. Ray loved children, he wrote, and just 3 weeks after Janet had been dispatched, wholesome, down-home beauty Delphine took Ray, to meet her family in Nebraska. Martha went along. Delphine told people that she found Martha to be loads of fun. Delphine slept with Ray, but a few weeks in, she realized she had missed a period, and, not wanting to push Ray into anything, she asked Martha, the former nurse, if she had something she could take for the problem. Martha handed her some pills, then said she'd watch the baby while Delphine got sick to her stomach and drowsy, but pleased when blood was soon visible on her underwear. She then fell onto her bed whimpering. Raynell became quite upset and crying, and Martha decided maybe the best way to stop all of this was to strangle the child. Ray intervened just in time, but Delphine had rallied when she heard her child's distress. This was bad. The hand marks were visible on Raynell's neck, and Delphine would call the police. The only thing to do was for Ray to wrap Delphine's late husband's handgun in a baby blanket and put 2 bullets in her brain. Next, they headed to the basement. Martha and Ray started to dig, hit some water, bailed it out into a wash tub, and, when the hole was reasonably dry and deep enough, put Delphine in it and shoveled on some wet cement. But what to do with Raynell? They took her with them to New York on a quickie visit they told the neighbors was a family emergency. Raynell was not happy about this. She was obviously afraid of them, and she slowed them down. Ray, as was his custom, told Martha to get rid of the problem. He didn't care how. The trio went back to Wyoming Township. Martha went into the basement and drowned Raynell in the washtub water she'd bailed out of her mother's grave. They clawed back the cement, put Raynell into her mother's arms, and made sure the cement covered them both. But Delphine had been a good neighbor, and those who lived close by didn't think that what was going on at her house seemed normal at all. So they called the police. Ray told officers that the mother and daughter had gone to Detroit, and he and Martha were watching the house. "Sure, come on in," he said. "You can look around." The toddler was still warm when they found her. Now, nothing gets law enforcement angrier than that they were so close to saving someone's life and hadn't or didn't or couldn't. And she was so little. At the police station, Martha and Ray were questioned, separated, and transported to nearby Grand Rapids for a more thorough going over. Fingerprinted and photographed, talked to briefly, introduced to the press, and taken to jail. Soon enough, Kent County District Attorney Roger McMahon introduced himself. Martha was first asked about Janet Fay, a murder that took place in New York. McMahon said if she'd cooperate with the New York investigators on that one, he could assure her a lighter sentence in Michigan. Then he went to Ray and made the same statement, something to the effect of, "You tell me you committed any crimes in any other states, you won't be prosecuted for them, only for the ones in Michigan. Don't care where those other states are, they can't get you." Oh, and Michigan doesn't have a death penalty. Lucky you. "Why are you interested in those other crimes?" Ray asked. McMahon, "I just want a statement for my own personal use. It won't be used against you." Martha had asked to consult with Ray before talking. He had given her the okay. And he was ready to talk to McMahon because, well, they had him, didn't they? He began by saying that he was no ordinary criminal. Ray quite nonchalantly explained about his business affairs and the resultant collateral damage. Meanwhile, the New York authorities were notified that Ray and Martha admitted to Janet Fay's death. It made the papers. From serial killers' documentaries.
It was page 1 in every big city newspaper. The New York Times wrote, 3 Lonely Hearts murders, trapped pair, body dug up here. Wherever Beck and Fernandez went while in custody, the photographers followed, hoping to catch a photo of America's most dysfunctional couple.
This triggered tips. Esther Henney called the police and told them how she had escaped the pair's clutches by just letting them have her money. Jane Thompson's mother then realized that Jane had been murdered in Spain, and she contacted those authorities. The list grew of those who had gotten fleeced but lived, but America's focus, of course, was on the grisliest of the crimes. Police throughout the country began searching their missing persons files to see if they could close some cases. It's not clear how many deaths came at the hands of Ray and Martha.
Putting an exact figure on it is pretty difficult. I know they were suspected in quite a few, around the country.
Some estimates put the body count around 17. D.A. McMahon had teased the media, saying he just might send these 2 to New York to burn and save Michigan taxpayers the trouble of keeping them alive for years. When he spoke to Martha and Ray, though, he assured them he would never allow that. He said he would even quit his job as district attorney if they were forced to leave the state. Martha and Ray were getting comfortable believing that they were caught, but they were not dead. And if they were not dead, they still had each other. A week after they had been caught, thousands showed up in Lansing to hear arguments that New York prosecutors were making to extradite Martha and Ray back to their state to be tried for the death of Janet Fay. Roger McMahon had told them they didn't need lawyers that day, as he would defend them. As J.T. Turner wrote in his book, Tortured Love, Ray looked at McMahon for reassurance. McMahon smiled back. Nassau County, New York's Assistant District Attorney Philip Huntington went on and on about why his state had the right to try them for their heinous act against Mrs. Fay, and that, of course, the death penalty was on the table. They had to return to New York. When he was finished, it was McMahon's turn to argue that they stay put. He said, quote, "I agree with everything Mr. Huntington has said," end quote. And he sat down. If it had been a circus before, it was most definitely a circus now. Crimes of Centuries is sponsored by Smalls. Cat extraordinaire's sister Betty Lou is eating Smalls these days and she's loving it, especially the chicken flavor. I don't want to get too excited, but it does seem like her fur is looking healthier. She had some bald spots before that are growing back in. Smalls is awesome because its protein-packed recipes are made with preservative-free ingredients that you would find in your fridge, yet you get the convenience of Smalls being delivered right to your door. Smalls was started in 2017 by a couple of guys home cooking cat food. A few short years later, they've served millions of meals to cats around the world. After making the switch to Smalls, 90% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. That's a big deal. The team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means they'll refund you if your cat won't eat their food. Now is the time to make the switch to Smalls. Head to smalls.com/COTC and use promo code COTC at checkout for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use my code COTC for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code COTC for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. The two lovers arrived in New York to be met with psychiatrists whose job was to explain why these people were not insane, as prosecutors believed that is what they would plea. When the report of the psychiatrist came back, Ray was found to have no conscience, but he otherwise had no problems that would exempt him from being tried. Martha, on the other hand, was developmentally stunted because of gross childhood sexual abuse.
I think one of the things that they found was that her emotional development had stopped at a pretty young age. I think she was like 8 or 9 years old, basically.
Her brother and an uncle assaulted her while she was still quite young.
Her mother really didn't do much as far as comforting her or really being there for her, or kind of quite the opposite, actually. Her mother kind of blamed her for what happened, basically, and became even more restrictive.
Martha is a conundrum. She had been a nurse and a good mother, from all accounts, until Ray, who just seemed to change her.
Before Martha got together with Ray, she had no kind of issues with breaking the law or anything like that in her background. So there was nothing that you could look to and say, oh, she's going to turn out doing bad things later on. There was really nothing like that, before she met Ray.
That didn't do much to sway the psychiatrists examining her. They found her to be psychopathic, suicidal, and promiscuous. Doctors in 1950 were a little judgy. So was the press. In several instances, Martha was referred to in print as, quote, a hippo in a tutu, end quote. Martha took notice. In a statement through her lawyer, she said, quote, I was pictured as a fat, unfeeling woman. True, I am fat. But if that were a crime, how many of my sex would be guilty? I am not without feeling. I am not stupid. I am not a moron. I am a woman who has had a great love and always will have, end quote. It's a weird feeling to both side with and vehemently disagree with someone at the same time. Martha, of course, should be judged only on her actions, not on her weight. Over the next few months, Martha and Ray confounded anyone who was paying attention. For starters, their attorneys said they were likely going to throw each other under the bus as to who was responsible for what. For another, they cuddled in the courtroom, kissing and holding hands, even while handcuffed. On one occasion, Ray told Martha that after the trial, they'd go to Niagara Falls. Martha said she could hardly wait. When the actual murder trial commenced in July, droves of women waited outside the courtroom for a chance to get in to see this Lothario and his sex-crazed lover. Eventually, police had to be called to control the crowd. A few days later, everyone there sensed a bombshell was coming. To fortify the insanity plea's appropriate use in this case, lawyer Herbert Rosenberg was ready to talk about the couple's abnormal sex practices. Specifically, he had Ray explain to the judge and jurors what fellatio and cunnilingus were. Ray looked to Martha, who nodded her approval that he could speak of it, and then drew them an explicit picture. 3 women jurors put their hands over their faces. One spectator got up and left the courtroom. Martha, at one point, had apparently been unable to achieve orgasm, and Ray sent her a quote-unquote Latin doctor who told her that mutual oral sex might prove the ticket. Somehow, this led to Ray being asked if he had planned the murders. He replied there wasn't any reason to kill Janet. He'd already gotten control of her money. His intent was to send her back to Albany.
I think it wasn't so much the thrill of the kill. It was more as kind of a means to an end, as they needed to get rid of the witnesses and things. If need be, as part of that, if they had to kill them, then, so be it.
All in all, there were maybe 5 versions of testimony about how Janet died or who did the killing, and if the head wounds killed her or if the strangulation did, or if it really even mattered. Martha and Ray were both found guilty of first-degree murder. Both were sentenced to die by electrocution. Their relationship suffered a bit while they were in prison, but they managed to bandage over their disagreements before their mutual death date was finalized for March 8, 1951. In the meantime, Ray had explained all to his wife in Spain, who blamed Martha for all of the unpleasantness. Just before midnight that Thursday, Ray Fernandez died first, having been carried to the execution chamber at Sing Sing because he refused to walk. The 36-year-old's heart stopped at 11:13 p.m. He was followed into the chamber by Martha Beck, who took it a lot better. Not that the press noticed her stoicism. Again, all they noticed was her weight, with the Associated Press calling her a 200-pound murderess with fat bulging under the death chair straps. Quote, "She entered the high, bare death chamber unassisted, squeezed into the tight-fitting chair with difficulty, and smiled ever so faintly at the two attending matrons. So long," formed her lips, but her voice was silent. End quote. 31-year-old Martha died within minutes of her lover. Their deaths did nothing to answer the many questions that lingered. Was Ray's brain injury the cause of his lack of remorse? Was Martha's very real history of familial sex abuse as a girl to blame for her need to be loved? Did the pair feed off each other, or was Martha without guile? It wasn't long after Martha and Ray confessed that the Michigan legislature, Michigan being the first English territory to abolish capital punishment in 1847, put together a death penalty proposition. Ultimately, that effort failed. Over time, Michigan legislators have made 40 unsuccessful attempts to do so. It was finally constitutionally banned there in 1963. New York officially outlawed capital punishment in 2004. To research this case, journalist Amy Wilson read Tortured with Love by J.T. Hunter, perused dozens of newspapers of the era, and listened to Hunter speak on his research into the two killers on NBC's House of Mystery Radio, which originally aired on June 6, 2020. Crimes of the Centuries is available early and ad-free through Grab Bag Collab. Join us at patreon.com/GrabBagCollab to hear not just exclusive content related to this show, but to also get access to several other shows on our profit-sharing network. Unless noted in the citations, this case was researched and written by me, Amber Hunt, and produced by Amanda Rossman and Henry Lavoie. Original music is by Bruce Hunt, Andrew Higley, and occasionally by my son, Hunt Van Ben Scoten. Other music comes from Soundstripe and Epidemic Sound. If you like the show, help us out by rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts. For more information or to recommend a case, go to centuriespod.com. On Instagram, we're at centuriespod, and check out our Crimes of the Centuries podcast Facebook page.